I thought that you would understand. Dawn is coming. Farewell, Leon. Death is all yours.
After the newly vampirized Matthias Kronqvist disappears from Walter's castle, he stays in the shadows for over 3 centuries. There is very little information about his actions during this time, but we know he eventually ended up in Wallachia, a land to the far east of Europe in what is now modern-day Romania. There he built his own castle and took upon the name of Count Vlad Tepes, better known as Dracula, or Son of the Devil, translating from Romanian. Now obviously, the Dracula from these video games is largely inspired by the Dracula from the movies, which in turn is inspired by the Dracula from the novel. Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1897 is one of the most popular horror books of all time and a hallmark of gothic horror, alongside Frankenstein and many others. It's also probably the most influential vampire story of all time. In the novel, Count Dracula is a lonely old man living mostly alone in a dreary castle in Transylvania, but plot twist, he's actually a vampire. I guess I spoiled that one for you. And he's really evil, and he has plans to move to England soon and spread his influence to the rest of Europe. It's a cool book, even if it's a bit of a hard read nowadays. If you're interested, I really recommend BBC's Count Dracula from 1977. It's the most faithful adaptation, I believe. Anyways, turns out novel Dracula is actually not the original either. He's also inspired by another guy, this being the historical Vlad III, or Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Tepes, or Vlad Dracula. He was the Prince of Vah-lah-heea from 1448 up to his death in 1476. There's a lot of weird vibes surrounding this guy. He's a national hero in Romania nowadays, but he was said to be pretty brutal, he really liked impaling his foes. That's in the name. There's also the fact that this sobriquet, Dracula, means son of the devil. Over time, Vlad's bad reputation morphed into fantastic stories about him being a terrible, evil vampire, drinking the blood of his foes and making pacts with the devil. Obviously, this is all bullshit. First off, Vlad was Christian. In fact, he was so damn Christian, he died fighting the Muslims at the eastern border to protect Christianity. Also, I lied, Dracula doesn't actually mean son of the devil, or at least it did not. See, in the modern Romanian language that's spoken today, it does mean that, but in medieval times, it didn't. Dracula's father, Vlad II, had joined the Order of the Dragon in 1431, which was kind of like a Christian crusader order type of thing, and as a result, he'd taken the sobriquet Dracul, meaning dragon. So when Vlad III took office, he used the sobriquet Vlad Dracula, meaning Vlad, son of the dragon. It's actually a very Christian title. It refers to a Christian order of knights, but eventually, as the language morphed, this innocent little word started to mean the exact opposite of the original intent. And finally, sure, Vlad was pretty brutal and violent, I guess, but that's not really unique to him, is it? There's plenty of other brutal and violent figures in history which could be called vampires by this logic. Nevertheless, that's the image he has, that's what he'll be remembered by, I guess, the real-life Count Dracula. I guess it's also worth pointing out some of the differences between historical Dracula and novel Dracula, because they're pretty big, actually. In the novel, Dracula lives in Transylvania and claims to be of CK ethnicity. The historical Dracula, in contrast, lived in Wallachia and was of Wallachian ethnicity. Now you might be thinking, oh, big deal, they're pretty close by, they're pretty much the same place, and they're part of the same country nowadays, they're both part of Romania, so it's fine. But the key word here is nowadays. In the 15th century, Transylvania was a part of the Kingdom of Hungary, while Wallachia was a vassal to the Ottomans. Transylvania mostly spoke Hungarian, while Wallachia mostly spoke Romanian. Transylvania was more Catholic, while Wallachia was mostly Eastern Orthodox. These two places were neighbors, sure, and they were both Christian, but their cultures were still rather different. They're not the same place, and placing Dracula in Transylvania rather than Wallachia makes a considerable difference. This could be just an honest mistake on the author's part. I don't imagine information about Eastern European history was readily available for Bram Stoker in the 1800s. Or it could be even a deliberate choice on his part, maybe, somewhat. I don't know, and we'll never know because Bram Stoker is deceased. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, I wanted to show you how different historical Dracula is from novel/movie Dracula. They're pretty much unrelated. Castlevania Dracula takes inspiration from both of these, but he's also his own thing. I know that sounds obvious, like, of course the Dracula from the anime video game isn't a faithful adaptation, but I thought I should get all of it out of the way before we start. Now, let's look at what our Vlad is doing when he arrives in Wallachia. And well, it's not much. Again, we don't have much information to go off of. The games don't really elaborate. We know he built a castle, and he was probably widely known, even possibly the governor of Vah-lah-heea, maybe. He titled himself Lord of the Vampires, and nobody really challenged that. He still had the Crimson Stone, so he was likely the most powerful creature in all of Europe. But we don't really hear about any large-scale hunts against Vlad, so by all accounts, it seems he actually stayed pretty chill. He was still kind of evil, he probably still drank human blood to survive, but from what we know, he interacted very little with humanity. Mostly stayed locked up in his castle alongside whatever monsters and night creatures he had as guards. Vlad did occasionally take guests though. Very special guests, to which he granted very special knowledge. An example of this is the Devil Forge Masters, humans who were trained by Dracula in the forbidden arts of alchemy. I'll elaborate on them next video. Another pretty important example is this woman named simply Lisa, or possibly Lisa Fahrenheit. We know very little about Lisa. The name doesn't sound Wallachian at all, so she probably came from pretty far away. But she was a healer. She was trying her best to help people out there with diseases and epidemics that plagued Europe, especially starting from the 14th century, and this eventually led her to meet Vlad. In the Netflix adaptation, she specifically sought him out because she was interested in his scientific and alchemical know-how. She wanted to learn more so she could help more people as a physician. In the games, this is never specified. Whatever the reason, they meet. Lisa meets Vlad, and it's love at first sight. Mostly because Lisa bears a striking resemblance to Elisabetta, Vlad's first wife. Some people theorize that Lisa is the reincarnation of Elisabetta. There's very little to back this up, but I'll lay down the strongest argument, I think. I didn't mention this last video, but Elisabetta Kronqvist's name is actually a reference to the 1992 Dracula adaptation. In that movie, the historical Vlad III has a wife named Elisabetta, and she dies, and in the plot of that movie, she later reincarnates in the 19th century as Mina Harker. Isn't that interesting? So if, in the movie, Elisabetta reincarnates as Mina to reunite with Dracula, I think there's a very good chance that the intent here, indeed, was for Lisa to be the reincarnation of Elisabetta Kronqvist. And I would certainly like that to be true, because if it is true, it would mean that Vlad's goal in becoming a vampire was actually accomplished. Last video I theorized that he wanted immortality so he could seek a way to meet Elisabetta again, and if Lisa is her reincarnation, then he did. He was successful in his endeavor, even if by total accident. Vlad and Lisa proceeded to lead a very happy relationship together. They even had a kid whom they named Adrian Fahrenheit Tepesh. This is where I got Lisa's surname from. And Adrian is pretty interesting because he's a Dhampir, so a half human, half vampire. Stronger than a human, but not as strong as a vampire. Doesn't burn in sunlight. We'll talk about him more later on. For now, all you need to know is that this was a very weird but merry little family that probably almost got Vlad to forget that he had forsaken his humanity. With Lisa by his side, he was a very happy man. Until she wasn't. In the 15th century, witch trials were pretty common in all of Europe, especially Hungary, which is really nearby. They weren't really common in Wallachia, they were more of a Catholic church kind of thing, and Wallachia wasn't Catholic. Regardless, it seems that Lisa somehow got caught up in one of these, maybe in Transylvania. She was deemed to be a witch, a wicked woman with fiendish knowledge of medicine and alchemy and other satanic things. Her punishment was to be burning at the stake during the day. So at a time when Vlad couldn't even leave his castle because he'd just burn in sunlight, his second wife was executed by a bunch of Christian fanatics who had no idea what they were doing. I think this is where he fully completes his transformation into Dracula. So Dracula was furious. He'd already lost his faith in God, who took his first wife, but now humanity had taken his second, and this was unacceptable. Through obscure rituals we can only imagine, Dracula sought out an ancient and forgotten evil deity and made a pact with it to obtain the powers of chaos, the antithesis of God. With these, he conjured demonic armies upon the earth. In 1476, Count Dracula initiated his war against mankind. His goal? Total extermination. From Holy Knight to genocidal maniac, this man has completed his transformation into an unforgivable monster. Now, he must be stopped. The church immediately organizes armies of knights and vampire hunters to battle against him. Worth pointing out that the games don't really distinguish between the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, and neither does the Netflix series, which is highly confusing. The Orthodox Church doesn't have the Inquisition, it's not really as organized and centralized as the Catholic Church, so I think Catholic would make more sense in this instance, especially since Transylvania, right nearby, is very Catholic, and in this extreme situation, it would make a lot of sense for Transylvanians to invade the domain of this maddened prince. But, as a counterpoint to me, the official Castlevania timeline claims it's supposed to be the Orthodox Church, but honestly, this is pretty clearly an afterthought, almost a retcon. In the games, there's no mention whatsoever of Eastern Orthodoxy, and most of the imagery is pretty Catholic, down to the cross even. The Orthodox cross looks slightly different from the standard Catholic one we see in the games. So, in conclusion, nothing. There's no conclusion. Either way, the church sends its forces against the vampire overlord. Of course, they fail, we're talking fucking Dracula here, so it has to resort to some desperate measures. You see, there is this little family called the Belmonts, you might have heard of them. Very competent vampire hunters. They were actually exiled though, or excommunicated, because they were so strong and held so much esoteric knowledge the common folk were actually kinda scared of them. But that time is past. It seems it's the Belmonts' time to shine. So the church calls in the current wielder of the mythical vampire killer, Trevor Belmont. Also known as Ralph Belmont in Japan. I guess they thought Ralph was too dumb a name for the localization. I do agree Trevor sounds cooler. His life previous to this is scarcely known. He was born around 1456, so 20 years old when he got tasked with the duty of defeating Dracula all by himself. Whip in hand, Trevor heads straight to Vah-lah-heea, and to the demonic castle at its center. This is where begins Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. This one's a Famicom/NES game from 1989, so very different from the one we covered last time. For this video, I'll be playing the Japanese version, called Akumajo Densetsu. The Japanese version of the cartridge had better sound chips, so the music sounds a lot better, and it's also slightly more fair difficulty-wise, as I'll later detail. I will be using an English patch, however, so it's the Japanese version, but all the text you'll be seeing will be in English. This, I think, is the best way to experience this game. In case you're wondering, yeah, the Netflix series is based on this, specifically the first 2 seasons of the first series. But as you'll see, there's many major differences. I've already played this game plenty of times before and have a very positive opinion of it. So, let's get on with it. As Trevor power walks through this abandoned Vah-lah-heea village, whipping up the skeletons and bats who've overrun, let's take some time to look at the gameplay of this beautiful game. When we're talking about the types of Castlevania games, there's generally 3 types you come across: classicvanias, igavanias, and 3D vanias. 3D vanias are, well, the 3D games like Lament or Legacy of Darkness, which sometimes are pretty different from one another. Igavanias are named after director Koji Igarashi, and they're mostly Metroidvania titles, 2D, big map, go explore and find new areas and bosses to beat, a la Metroid or Hollow Knight. Classicvanias then are the most classic titles, as the name implies. They're the typical platformers you play on a level-to-level basis. Beat a level, get to the boss, beat the boss, go to the next level. Very simple and straightforward. Dracula's Curse here is a classicvania, so it follows this formula. You have just 2 buttons, jump and attack. The jump in these games is really sluggish and can't be controlled in midair, and this is a conscious decision from the developers that makes platforming a lot more difficult and punishing. Then the attack button, of course, is for you to pull out the vampire killer and get to some whipping. When Leon had the whip, he could use its alchemical powers to absorb elemental energy and weaponize it against his foes. Now that it's in Trevor's hands, it seems to no longer have that capacity. To compensate though, it can now change shape through transmutation. You start out the game with this puny letter whip, but as you destroy your first candles, you'll very quickly gather 2 whip upgrades. The first upgrade is the chain whip, which is slightly longer and does more damage, and the final upgrade is the Morning Star, which is really long and the most recognizable form of the vampire killer probably. I guess the Belmonts have been slowly uncovering the secrets of this weapon over the past few centuries, and of course, Trevor here has been trained to fully utilize its potential. Speaking more in gameplay terms though, I think this upgrade system for the whip is really weird, because you start out with the letter whip every time you die, so you have to get the upgrades all over again and get back to full strength. It makes sense in paper, but it's very easy to get the whip upgrades. They drop almost instantly after you respawn. There's been very few situations in my time playing this game where I didn't have the Morning Star, or at the very least the chain whip. It's just kind of a pointless game system, honestly. I don't really see the point in it, and the later classicvanias even do away with it entirely. But here, we have to deal with it. It's not too bothersome, I suppose, just strange. What else? Sub-weapons. All the Belmonts gotta have sub-weapons. They consume hearts, which you get from candles, and you throw them by holding up and attacking at the same time. The dagger is the weakest, pretty much a trap option. It flies forward and does very little damage. The axe arcs upwards to get the enemies above you. The holy water ignites the ground. The cross is the best one, it works like a boomerang. And the stopwatch stops time for a bit, but it's very costly to use. Most of these are very useful and integral to this game, since your whip can be quite limited in its reach. As we smash through Dracula's forces here, you'll see that the enemies in this game are very familiar. You have undead, you have the Fleamen, which I didn't mention last time, but they were in Lament as well. Later on you have the Armored Knights, and even this stupid Bone Pillar is here in the first stage. A lot of the enemies in the franchise are reoccurring. It does have this sort of thematic unity in its bestiary. Here we can also see the godforsaken Medusa heads, which fly through the screen, not to be confused with the real Medusa. These were absent from Lament. They're probably the most annoying enemy of the whole franchise. I'll just go ahead and say I think Dracula's Curse is really fun. I enjoy classicvanias in general, but this is probably my second favorite, maybe third. It's really challenging, it gets really hard later on, but I think it's mostly fair. The level design is great, not afraid to get pretty brutal, and that's good. The game is kind of janky at times, it's very old, but that's part of what makes it a challenge as well. It feels so rewarding to beat these stages. One major complaint I do have, I guess, is about the bosses. We're getting to the first one right now in this little graveyard here. It's a Skull Knight. Most of the bosses in this game are very simple and many of them you beat by attacking as aggressively as possible and hoping to God you don't run out of health. They're probably the weakest part of the game. Nothing too terrible, but it is noticeable. I guess I can't fault the game too much, it is an NES title after all. Anyways, after kicking that guy's ass, we head on to our journey with this big map here. See, we didn't start out at the castle proper. As you can see from the map, we're still a ways off. The castle's surrounded by this huge lake, so it's pretty hard to reach. Most of the game will be spent on the way there, not inside it, which if you only watch the Netflix series must sound pretty different. There they just teleport straight to the entrance. Another cool thing about this game specifically is that, well, it's linear, mostly, but there's branching paths, like here. We can either choose to continue southwards through the forest, or we can try to cross this bridge and head straight to the castle. The bridge is guarded by a clock tower, which is really challenging, but since I'm such a pro gamer, I'll naturally take the shorter route. I love the music here. Clock towers tend to be some of the hardest stages in the series, and this one is tough, but since it's at the beginning of the game, they go a little easy. Still, lots of gears, stairs, tricky jumps, and slowdowns because this game is really taxing on the console. It's a moderate spike in difficulty. And that's not all. The top of the tower is guarded by a terrible monster which climbs walls and throws blades at you. However, upon besting him in combat, Trevor discovers that wasn't a monster, just a normal dude who reverts to his original form. This is Grant the Nasty, a local bandit slash thief who actually tried to organize a resistance movement to fight off the Count. As you can see though, he failed. Grant had been turned into a demon to serve as Dracula's pawn, but now he's been freed. As such, he would join Trevor in his quest to free Vah-lah-heea. Unfortunately for them, the bridge connecting to the castle immediately collapses, probably by Dracula's own doing, so this detour was actually kind of useless. It's an optional area. Now we have to climb all the way back down. You can swap between characters with the press of a button, though it takes horrifically long for some reason, and then you can play as Grant. He's faster, more agile, his jumps go really high and have mid-air control, and in the Japanese version he can throw daggers for free, no hard costs needed. The American version removed this because they wanted to make the game harder. There he just has a tiny knife. Stupid. You can also use sub-weapons with him, but only the axe and the stopwatch are available. Lastly, Grant can climb walls and ceilings, which is kinda janky, but really damn useful. Grant is probably the strongest character in the game. Really versatile movements, and his base attack is weak, but reaches across the fucking screen. Well, let's head on to the forest. If you get here from the clock tower, you actually skip the start of the stage, but it's not a big difference. These giant owls can get annoying, but in general this stage is easier than the clock tower. In the middle here, we actually get another split, which is the main split in the game. For now we'll take the upper route through exploding mushrooms and giant spiders. At the end of this path, our heroes meet the terrible Cyclops. This ain't the first time we see a Cyclops in the series. Leon himself fought a few in his time. Cyclopes are one-eyed giants from Greek mythology, and there's many stories attached to them. Sometimes they're said to be sons of the earth and the sky, the forgers of Zeus's lightning bolt. Other times they're just barbarians roaming the land, and even other times they're great builders of ancient architecture. In later games, many Cyclopes get the ability to shoot petrifying lasers from their eyes, which is in line with the Netflix series. That is not the case here. This Cyclops has a big hammer for a weapon, which he uses to hammer you, and that's about it. That's all his attacks. You notice there's a few statues in the background, which are his previous victims, turned to stone. Now the question is, if the Cyclops in this game can petrify, how were they petrified? I do not have the answer. Anyhow, all you need to do to beat this guy is use these blocks to evade him and hit his big ol' eye. Pretty underwhelming. As he perishes, lightning flashes in the sky, and one of his fallen foes is freed from his stony prison. Meet Sypha Path. This guy's a sorcerer descended from a family of powerful magicians. He was sent here by the church to put down Dracula, but just like Grant, he's failed. He offers to join us, and I accept. Unfortunately for this game, you can only have one companion at a time, so Grant has to part ways with us here. Nevertheless, we head on to a haunted ship that sails on its own and attempt to cross the lake into Dracula's castle. So trivia about Sypha. He's not a dude, actually, she's a woman. You only learn of this after beating the game, but I figure 90% of people watching this already know, so I won't keep the farce up. Sypha hides her identity because of the witch hunts. You know, she's a woman who knows magic, so a witch wouldn't want to end up like Lisa did, right? About her ethnicity, the Netflix series gives her a Spanish accent, which I guess I agree with. Her surname does sound vaguely Latin, and one of the earlier translations for said surname was Fernandez. Also, if she were from Spain, she'd technically be part of the Spanish Inquisition. Just wanted to add that. The most we know about Sypha's background is that she lost most of her family to the witch trials, and this is partly thanks to the machinations of Carmilla. Carmilla doesn't show up in this game, so I'll leave my comments on this fact for a later video. After having her family destroyed by a vampire, Sypha is, of course, very unhappy at them in general, so she very much wants to see Dracula dead. As we make our way through the ship, we can see her gameplay here. Sypha's melee attack is nearly useless. It's a short-range hit with her wands, which will often get you hurt, but the real deal with her is the magic. Sypha's made contracts with elemental spirits, and as such, she can manifest their power. Instead of having normal sub-weapons, Sypha gets spellbooks, and each spellbook lets her use a different spell. The fire spell is a short burst of flames, which deals plentiful damage. The ice spell is a small blast that freezes enemies and makes them die in one hit, and the lightning spell fires 3 homing thunderbolts which decimate her foes. Sypha can be tricky to use, especially when you're out of hearts, but her sorcery is absurdly useful. Getting back to the ship now, this is one of my favorite levels, I think. It's filled with ghosts and swordsman skeletons, you know, it's kind of like a ghost pirate ship, and there's some tricky platforming that we'll see even more of later on. This is the first stage to have a mini-boss at the middle of it, this being the Medusa, and this time she actually has her whole body, so I guess Drac did a better job than Walter at resurrecting her. Sypha absolutely destroys her. As for the actual boss, it's this ghostly flame spirit capable of giving life to the creatures contained within these coffins. The first one opens to reveal 2 living mummies shooting bandage wraps at you, and mummies are a staple of horror cinema. They were popularized by the mummy movies from Universal Pictures and later Hammerfilm Productions. The ones we see in Castlevania are probably most inspired by Karis, which is this fellow here. In this game, the mummies show up both as bosses and as weaker common enemies in other stages. They can get pretty hectic to fight here, but Sypha's DPS can finish them off rather quick. The second coffin contains the Cyclops, which is resurrected, and he's the exact same. Also, looking at the map here again, I said before the castle was located in the middle of a lake, but this made me wonder, what's a ship? What's like a pirate ship doing in the middle of a lake? Ships should be out at sea, right? And then I figured, well, maybe this is the Black Sea. The Black Sea is actually just outside of Wallachia, so that's a bit of a stretch, but it could realistically be that the castle is actually on the shorelines east of Wallachia. We'll get back to this in future videos, but keep it in your head. The ship does actually lead Trevor to the castle, and the next stage sees him climbing this tower here. It's a very vertical level, lots of stairs, there's these sections where the camera auto-scrolls and you have to run from the bottom to the top. Not really sure how that works in universe. This is also where we see the first gargoyles, which I retract my earlier statement, these are much more annoying than the Medusa heads. They have these weird fucking arcs that get wider as they go. God, it feels like ass fighting these on the stairs. At the top of the tower, we reach the gloomy night sky, and we find the exit is protected by Frankenstein's monster, aka the Creature. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1818 is one of my personal favorites, honestly. It's a really good horror book, way better than Dracula, I think. It's about the mad Swiss scientist Victor Frankenstein giving life to an inhuman monster. Or that's what the movies would lead you to believe. The book is a bit more morally complex. I don't want to spoil it though, you should read it. The Creature here is more based off of Universal and Hammer's movies. Many of the classicvania bosses are. So he's this simple-minded brute giant, he stomps, throws blocks at us. It's funny to think that, well, this game takes place in 1476, but the actual creature in the novel was created only sometime in the 1700s. Maybe in this universe Dracula was his creator. Or Victor Frankenstein was a vampire? Aha! I don't know. The next stage is the bridge leading to the main buildings of the castle. This one doesn't collapse, but it's protected by plenty of beasts, fishmen, and it's flooded for some god-forsaken reason. I guess maybe it's an aqueduct. Tough stage, but Sypha makes it a little bit easier since she can actually freeze the flowing water. Here we fight a duo of water dragons who breathe fire. Not much to say about them culture-wise. Giant serpentine sea creatures are seen in many mythologies like the Hydra or the Leviathan. Pretty generic. I guess Dracula just has some of these lying around in his pond. Now we're finally at the gates of the castle proper. This following level is the entrance courtyard filled with moss, knights, and fleamen. It's not too bad, but at the end we do get a hard boss. See, it's the evil flame again, and it summons more mummies and another cyclops to beat us, but this time there's also a third coffin, and from this one springs a scary demon. I believe this is the first demon we see in the series by the release order, but it won't be the last. He's always reminded me of Nosferatu Zod from Berserk for some reason. Doesn't have a name, but there is a guy called Pazuzu in Harmony of Dissonance that seems to be based on his design. This bro's so thick he can barely fly, and he shakes the ground when he falls. Can get tricky to avoid the fire spewing, but holy water does him in. And from here, we head on to the main hall of Dracula's castle. Let's stop for a moment though. Remember the forked road way back in the forest? That was a little before we saved Sypha, like just before the Cyclops. If, rather than staying in the upper route, we take these stairs down, we can actually get to the castle through a different path. We find ourselves in a murky swamp inhabited by giant frogs, mudmen, and ghosts, and we eventually reach a cave, which is home to a giant green bat that can somehow split itself into smaller ones. The giant bats are a staple of the series, we'll see much more of them later on, but this is one of the weirder ones, I think. From here, Trevor and Grant are actually able to access an underground passage that moves towards their goal. They traverse this bizarre cave system with flying eyeballs, mummies, fire elementals, and acid dripping from the ceiling, and amidst their spelunking, they find a mini-boss. It's Dracula! The man rises from his coffin as a cloud of bats slinging fire spells, but the whip blocks them effortlessly. We beat him so hard his sprite gets smaller, and he reveals he was just testing us. See, he's not actually Dracula. This is Alucard. His real identity is Adrian Fahrenheit Tepesh, the son of Lisa and Vlad. When Dracula turned his wrath against humanity, he attempted to get his son on his side, and yeah, that made sense. Adrian had personally seen his mother burn at the stake and naturally resented that. In some of the older lore sources, it was even said that Adrian was made to form the same pact his father had formed with that mysterious evil god, but it seems that never did come to be. Regardless of his feelings for humanity, Adrian was not too keen on exterminating it. He realized his father needed to be deterred. That's why he took the title of Alucard, the opposite of Dracula. We don't know exactly why he chose to wait here, inside this cave, but it seems he was hoping a strong enough hero would come by to help him. And now, Belmont has. Alucard's appearance in this game is very obviously inspired by the 1943 film Son of Dracula, which features a vampire called Alucard as its main villain. It's a weird movie, honestly. The title implies Alucard is the son of Dracula, but that's never actually mentioned in the script. In fact, in the script, the characters find out Alucard is Count Dracula himself, just with a different name. There's nothing there about son of, he's just the guy.
And all about you. You're not Count Alucard, but Count Dracula.
I think what might have happened is Universal Pictures wanted to make another Dracula movie, but they couldn't get Bela Lugosi, who was the Dracula at the time, and so they got some other guy and called him the son of Dracula so people wouldn't get confused. It did not work. I am very confused. Sorry for the rambling. Getting back to Castlevania, you might have noticed that Alucard's design here doesn't match at all what it would become later. This is never explained, he just becomes blonde for some reason. I guess it does make sense, it matches his mother's hair, but he wasn't blonde here. Here's some cool art that I found that gives him short blonde hair, and some footage of the patch that switches up his sprite to the modern design. So he wants to join us, and as was with Sypha, we need to abandon Grant for this to happen. We then continue into the caverns. Alucard in this game plays rather different than he would later in the series. His only weapon is a fire spell, which shoots tiny short-range projectiles. Much like the whip, you can upgrade it, and it becomes sort of like a shotgun at its peak. Decent damage, but you have to be pretty close to your target. The only sub-weapon he can equip is the stopwatch, but his real deal is his transformation. As any good vampire, Alucard can turn into a bat. This consumes hearts over time, slightly faster in the international release so it can be harder. And when you're a bat, you can't attack, but you can fly and just go around everything in the stage if you're skilled enough. It can be used to skip a lot of annoying sections, and trust me, there are a lot of annoying sections in this half of the game. It doesn't take long for us to meet another split. This is the last one in the game. We can either stay in this cave or go further down into mysterious depths. We'll stay here for now. The real boss of the cave is this Skull Knight, which is stronger than the first one and throws bones at you. This leads into the catacombs, which are fairly easy. I do wonder whose graves these catacombs are housing though. Dracula doesn't really have an extended family, so maybe these belong to the previous owners of the castle, and now he's using them to raise the dead and fill up his ranks, or he just butts everyone he kills here. We meet the creature again as the boss here. In the other route, we found it at the top of the tower leading to the castle entrance, so maybe in this alternate timeline, it was sent down here by Drac to impede our advancement. Doesn't work. He's slightly stronger, but the same boss, just whip and cross. If we'd instead chosen to go down earlier, we would have found an underground sunken city, kinda like Atlantis. Don't ask me what a Greek-looking city is doing in Vah-lah-heea, I have no idea. Although, I actually googled this, and it turns out there is an abandoned Greek settlement in Romania on the western coast of the Black Sea. Oh my god. It was founded in the 7th century BCE and only abandoned 1,000 years later. If we go by this, it could very well be that Atlantis in the Castlevania universe was actually built in Wallachia, and somehow Dracula's castle ended up being... Anyways, bone dragons, they spit fire and hang from walls, but there's this fellow named the Bone Dragon King who doesn't hang from walls, it just flies. We almost kill it, but it runs away and somehow causes the whole city to start flooding. I mean, even more. We escape the rising water level and reach the dragon to finish it off and get the hell out of here, please God. The catacombs in the sunken city meet up here in an abandoned mineshaft. This is directly below the main hall in Dracula's castle. It's one of the hardest levels in the game. It's got the acid dripping from the ceiling again, melting through stone, these annoying oozes, and right near the beginning, the multiplying bat shows up again as a mini-boss, and then true torture begins. This falling block section here is so long and excruciating. You have to wait for these to drop so they slowly build up your path to salvation, but of course if they fall on you, they damage you, and it's really hard to evade them. Eventually I was able to memorize the patterns and consistently dodge, but it still takes so long for this section to be over. You can sort of cheat with Alucards and just fly, but the odds of you getting hit by a block and just dropping are pretty high. And after this, there's more! Moving platforms, this section I just skipped of Alucard, Medusa heads, the screen scrolling up, and at the end of all that, when you're already reaching the dungeons at the base of the castle, you meet the blue flame boss with all 3 coffins, dummy, tick, demon, and all. It's a marathon, Jesus Christ. I guess I can use the opportunity to talk about difficulty here. A lot of the difficulty in these old classicvanias comes from the life system. You know, you start out with 3 lives, if you die you go back to the checkpoint, but if you lose all lives, you go back to the start of the stage. And so much of the runtime in these games is just getting a game over at the boss and having to redo the whole stage. Personally, I don't think the limited life system is very good game design. I think it's very arcade, like very waste more time playing your game. I bet a lot more people would enjoy Dracula's Curse and other classicvanias if they had an option for infinite lives. But I digress. Still on difficulty, I mentioned earlier that the American version is generally harder than the Japanese version. So how it works is, in the Japanese version, each enemy has its own separate damage value. Certain enemies do little damage, other enemies do heavy damage, etc. In the international release though, all enemies do the same damage. But, here's the catch, the damage changes as the game goes on. So in late game stages, every single hit you take is like a truck running you over, no matter what hit you. Some of the bosses have more health as well. This was probably done on purpose to make the game harder, so kids would have to rent out cartridges for longer. Capitalism, baby. And this is another reason why the Japanese version is superior. Unless you're really looking for a challenge, you shouldn't need to subject yourself to even more artificial difficulty, I think. Well, after we beat the demon for a second time, the paths meet up. Both the courtyard and the mines lead us into the main hall. By now, Trevor should have his party complete, in canon. In the game, you can only take 1 companion at a time, but as far as we know, they all got here. Trevor Belmont, Sypha Alucard, and Grant Dynasty, all ready to kick some vampire ass. The first 3 are the protagonists of the Netflix adaptation, especially in the first few seasons, so they're very recognizable. If you've only watched that though, you probably don't remember Grant. Grant was left out of the animation, partially because the writer thought the idea of pirates in Vah-lah-heea sounded stupid, but Grant isn't supposed to be a pirate. He's said to be a pirate, true, but only in the US manual. In the original Japanese manual, that's never mentioned. He's a bandit, there's nothing about piracy. Mr. Warren Ellis isn't exactly the brightest, but let's save my criticisms of him for another time. There is this character named Greta in Season 4, by the way, who may or may not be a vague nod to Grant. She lives in the village of Dynasty, and she leads the resistance movement there against the night creatures. So it really feels like it is a reference, but apparently a producer confirmed it was not in an interview. Press X to doubt? Well, now that we're finally in the actual castle, 3 levels remain on our way to the throne room. Let's get to it. The main hall of Dracula's castle is pretty iconic, and shows up in different forms over multiple games. Same goes for Vampire Killer, which is the music playing here. This stage is actually a bit of a breather compared to the underground stages. It's pretty cool, but the boss is one of the toughest in the game. Remember Death, yeah? The Chaos Demon? Well, he serves whoever wields the Crimson Stone, and that's still Dracula, so here he is, revived and protecting his lord. He's one of the most recurring villains in the whole series. You know, he's kind of like Dracula's lieutenant, so expect to see a lot more of him. As I said, he's very hard, it's a nightmare to dodge all the scythes he summons, and even if you do get through the first phase, there's a second one. Death takes on his true form, a giant skull which spits out scythes. It's not that cool, is it? Well, he has other cooler final forms which he can take. We'll see them in future games. so it's fine. Sypha obliterates him, by the way. You can grab a lightning spell right before, and it just destroys his health bar. The second to last stage is the hardest in the game, I would say. The Abandoned Mine stage is up there as well, but this goes even further beyond. I believe it's the longest level in the game. It certainly feels like it, at least. It takes you through a small outdoor sequence in a sort of garden where you're bombarded by fleamen, and then you head into the innermost halls of this fortress. There's a waterfall here, and as we climb through this autoscroller, we find another area filled with flowing water. So maybe the bridge/aqueducts from the upper routes is actually linked to this place. Like the water down there comes from up here. I don't know where the water from up here is coming from though. I'm summarizing a lot here, but trust me, this place is infernal. It has every annoying enemy, almost every annoying gimmick in the game. It's like the game is throwing everything it has against you, like a final test to smash you into the ground. Not easy. Fuck me. Even the boss is hard. At the very top, a doppelganger protects the entrance to the second clock tower. Already seen this one in Lament, it works pretty similar here. Takes the form of whatever character you're using and tries to kill you, and of course it has a lot more health than you, so you have to place more to win. Thankfully it's not a very intelligent creature you're up against, but it takes some time for you to figure out how to beat it. By the time you do, you've probably game overed multiple times, which means you'll have played this stage over multiple times. Yay. After that hell on earth, it's the second clock tower, as I'd said. And this is the one of Dracula's throne, so we're pretty close. This descent here is really stressful because Medusa heads. I can almost never get through this bone pillar without taking damage, and these pendulums are pretty tricky. You have to remember not to jump in the last one here. It is hard, but it's also short. Leads straight to the stairway to the throne room, which is the classic final stretch for this franchise. Now normally, the base of the stairway in these games is a continuum point, so you can die however many times you want and you just come back here. Not the case in Castlevania 3. If you game over here, you have to do the stage again, which is annoying. And in the US version, there's not even a checkpoint here, you actually go back to before the pendulums, which is really annoying. Considering we're about to face off against the most challenging fight in the game, you can probably imagine this raises the difficulty of the stage by quite a bit. Yay, again. As the four heroes barge into the throne room, Count Vlad Tepes rises from his throne. The rebel and the sorcerers are insignificant to him, worthless insects easily overpowered by his minions. The other two are more interesting, however. His eyes first glide over Adrian, his son, betrayer to his cause and to the memory of Lisa. Then they stop at Trevor, the Belmont. This is the first encounter between Vlad and a Belmont in almost 400 years, the fated reunion prophesied by Leon. The vampire killer, bearing a tainted soul, licks its lips at the prospect of vanquishing Matthias Kronqvist. The time has come. Surely knowing he's beyond redemption, Dracula wastes not a second to think, not even about Adrian. Under the light of a crescent moon, he raises his scepter and begins this destined fight. Like Walter, and also like Alucard I guess, Dracula uses teleportation and pyromancy. This fight takes some pretty tough positioning, and these fire pillars he uses makes it really different from most Dracula fights. It's cool. I really like Drac's drip here, by the way. Look at that wizard cloak he's got, it's great. Our heroes actually do beat him, but then he turns into a Lovecraftian monster. As a vampire, Dracula has shape-shifting abilities, and he can assume many forms, but it seems this goes completely out of whack here, possibly due to the influence of the powers of chaos, which he's recently acquired. This thing flies across the screen like a DVD screensaver and spits acid from its many mouths. It's actually a little easier than the first phase, but don't let it distract you from the fact that there's a third phase! Oh yeah! It's not really clear if this is Dracula himself, further transformed by chaos, or the manifestation of the evil gods he made a pact with. Anyways, he shoots lasers and moves the room around. It's really easy to mess up and fall into a pit here, so it's hard. but it's quite doable if you stay calm. We banish this fiend to whatever pit in hell it spawned from, and then the deed is done. Dracula's gone, and his castle crumbles in response, almost like it was a part of him. You can get 4 different endings depending on what characters you had. Trevor's ending is just him hoping he can get his family's reputation back after this, which he will. Thanks to him, the Belmonts become legends. In the Grant ending, we learn that he plans to help rebuild Wallachia. In the Sypha ending, we learn that she's a girl. See, you can tell because it has long hair. She gets pretty close to Trevor, and they live happily ever after. Finally, in the Alucard ending, we got a bit of his personal thoughts. This man just helped murder his own father. Sure, it was necessary, but it still shakes him. Alucard will go into slumber shortly after, get a coffin somewhere, and just rest. Alone in the world, he doesn't really have a purpose anymore. Humanity has been saved. The greatest evil it has ever encountered, a force dedicated to wiping it off the earth, has been defeated by these formidable warriors and one legendary whip. That doesn't mean it's over, of course, monsters still exist, but it'll be alright. Trevor and Sypha become a couple, and they'll ensure the Belmont family heads on, alongside the vampire killer, protector of mankind. Although, if you know anything about this franchise, you're probably aware that Dracula's story isn't quite done yet. Alright, closing thoughts. Good game. Incredible, in fact. I'll reinstate. I love classicvanias, and CV3 is one of the best. It's sometimes unfairly hard, but I like hard, so I can swallow it. I'm not sure I'd recommend it for newcomers to the series, cause it can get very frustrating, but any Castlevania fan should try it out sometime. And if you're looking for something that plays similar to Dracula's Curse but is a bit more forgiving for the modern audience, try out Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. It's like a spiritual successor to this game, and has got a lot of former Castlevania devs on its team, even a former composer. It's much more polished, naturally, since it's from 2018, you can play with infinite lives if you want, and it even fixes the whole companion problem. In Bloodstained, you can have all 4 of your companions at the same time and swap them pretty quickly. I do enjoy Bloodstained quite a bit, but I'll be saving further comments for a possible future miniseries on it. Story-wise, Dracula's Curse is simple enough, but I think decently effective. The original Japanese title, Akumajo Densetsu, means The Legends of the Demon Castle. That's because this game was produced and marketed as a prequel to the first Castlevania, the original fight between the Belmonts and the forces of evil. Then Lament did exactly that all over again a decade later. Regardless, it does work for me, and it clearly did as well for a lot of people that watched the animation. One thing I really enjoy about, well, all Classicvanias is the visual storytelling. Like, this game takes you through the entire journey to Dracula's castle, and you can tell that just by looking at the scenery. The backgrounds always tell you exactly where you are and change to match your location, and that all neatly lines up with the world map you get. It's great. This game especially really nails the legendary adventure feel it's going for. I love the attention they put into these little details for the silly Whip the Vampire game. Couple things to add. Though I mentioned Dracula having the Crimson Stone earlier in the video, it's never really addressed ever again. Many official portrayals of him do feature the red jewel on his neck, which is always to be interpreted as the Crimson Stone, but this is retroactive. The whole Crimson Stone plot from Lament came after most of this art was drawn, and again, never addressed. Lament was actually one of the last Castlevania games to come out and be set in the original universe, so I guess the writers didn't have that much time to work with the concept. Still weird that they didn't. Also, can Dracula sustain Eternal Night? That's a pretty important question, I think. All of Castlevania 3 takes place during the night, likely the same night. Walter was able to shroud his castle in permanent darkness by using the Ebony Stone, but that was shattered by Leon. Can Dracula do something similar, even without it? It certainly feels like it. Most of these games take place during the night, so I've always assumed Dracula's presence and power naturally brings about the shadows. This is also not elaborated on, however. Historical trivia: 1476 is the year in which the historical Vlad perished, fighting alongside Matthias Corvinus of Hungary to push back the Ottomans. Vah-lah-heea would then sink deeper into political turmoil. In the context of Castlevania here, that makes a lot of sense, as the former prince of this region just attempted to speedrun genocide 100%. After you beat the main game, you get thrown straight into the second quest. This is standard NES padding. If you want, you can play the whole game again, but now there's harder enemy placements, and it's much more difficult. Also, you don't get companions again, so you're stuck with whoever you had before. I don't really do second quests, I think they're kinda stupid, but it's there if you really want to test your skills. And for all the Castlevania nerds out there, no, I did not forget. There's a non-canon prequel to this game, and I will talk about that. Not today though. Nor tomorrow. I'm postponing that shit. For the next video, Curse of Darkness, which the Netflix series kind of adapted, sort of. Okay, not really, it has nothing to do with the Netflix series.